May as well. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 20th, 2021 meeting of the Zoning Hearing Board for the City of Reading. If you're wondering why we are doing the third Wednesday, it's because City Hall was closed due to the pandemic, and they are still under certain restrictions. So therefore, we're still on Zoom. And we want to thank Mr. Paris and City Council and the employees for providing this forum for us to do this. So I'm going to introduce the members of the board that we have in contact. Mr. Bars doesn't seem to be with us this evening, so we'll start. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Tom Fox, member of the board.
Okay. Jeff? Jeff, you're muted.
Jeff is muted.
Okay. I'm Phil Rabina. I'm a member of the board. Steve?
Jared Barnes, member of the board.
Jared's in. Steve Price, solicitor to the board.
Okay. Mr. Bars?
Yes.
You want to introduce yourself?
Jared Barnes, member of the board.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Mr. Harst is there or not. I can't tell. Anyway, we were to have 3 cases this evening, and the appeal 2020-22, 1317 North 10th Street has been withdrawn. And I'm going to make a motion to accept that withdrawal request. Do I have a second from the board?
Second.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it carries. All right, the first appeal is 2020-12-1124 Schuylkill Avenue and 1119 Lucerne Street. Now, this proposal has been before us before, and both parties asked for continuances in order to see if they could work out some things between them. So at this point, why don't we have both attorneys, Attorney Frankowski and Attorney Lewis, enter their appearances, and then anybody that's going to testify, Sandra, would you please swear them in?
Kelsey Frankowski here on behalf of the applicant, Iglesia Pentecostal Movimiento de Fe Incorporated.
Okay.
And good evening, Rob Lewis from Kaplan Stewart, representing Pat and Tim Korn, the owners of the property identified as 1132 and 1134 Schuylkill Ave, immediately adjacent to the property that's the subject of the proceeding this evening.
Okay, thank you.
I think you're unmuted now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Paris, excuse me, Sandra, would you swear in Mr. Paris, please?
Will you please raise your right hand? Do you swear the testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I don't know why I can't.
I do.
My camera's
Has notice for this appeal been given?
Damn it.
Yes, it has.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Price.
Thanks. Because this is a continuance of a prior hearing, all the exhibits that I normally would enter at the beginning of the hearing were entered, I believe, in the August 2020 hearing. So I have no other exhibits to enter.
Okay.
I guess except the transcript from the August 2020 hearing. I think that would be exhibit number 6, I believe.
6?
Okay.
I believe 6, Sandra, yeah.
All right. I think, why don't we do this? Without going through everything that's happened, let's deal with what changes have occurred in the meetings of the 2 people and where things stand at this point. So why don't we start with Attorney Frankowski first, and then Attorney Lewis. And after each person has their say, I will go around the board to see if there's any questions. I'll go to Mr. Price and Mr. Paris. And then if anybody in the audience has any questions, we'll go to them. Okay? All right. Attorney Frankowski.
Thank you, Mr. Rabina. So since the last time that we all gathered, we did make efforts to interact with the neighbors, the Corns, to try to understand what their concerns were a little bit better and maybe come to some sort of resolution on how to just make everybody happy with the addition being built and with the Corns' concerns. So we did go out to the property and we met there with Mr. Herrera, who is present tonight, and Dan Laudenslayer, who is another engineer that was working
what number
with
do I call?
For you or not.
And what we decided and what we determined at that meeting was that the plans that we had originally submitted for 1124 Schuylkill Avenue weren't really feasible for purposes of land development, for the way that the parking was and the drive aisles were situated. And so we decided that we thought it would be best to come up with a different set of plans, something that was a little bit more feasible. And what we learned was that the church also owns an adjoining property. It owns 1119 Luzerne Street, which is behind 1124 Schuylkill Avenue. And we decided to come up with plans that would sort of allow us to build the addition in conjunction with using 1119 Luzerne in order to sort of open up the flow of traffic, to create more parking spaces, and to sort of use the properties in conjunction with one another. We did present those plans and submit an application for that property with Mr. Paris. We shared the plans with Mr. Lewis and his clients. And I think that in theory, the plans are a lot better than the original set, but the issues that the Corns are still having are with respect to wanting my client to restripe the parking lot at their premises and put up no church parking signs on their premises, and do sort of certain things on their premises to alleviate what they believe their concerns to be. And my client's position on their requests is basically that these new plans will take away a lot of the concerns. They'll alleviate a lot of the parking. The new plans go from having, I think, 24 parking spaces to 35. The addition would only require the church to have 27. So we're really increasing parking. The alleyways that are shown on the plans that were an issue are going to be widened. One of the parts of the plan is to actually open up the alleyway that is connected to Luzerne Street, because right now it's just a grassy lot. We believe that opening that up will give people more of an incentive to use the alleys instead of the drive aisles that are shared between the laundromat and the church. So we tried to do a lot in these plans to alleviate their concerns, but ultimately my client is spending a lot of money to alter these plans to be able to do these things and try to alleviate some of the Corns' concerns. But my client isn't willing to go to the limits of expending money on things like signage for their property, restriping their parking spaces, and doing those kind of things. So that's sort of where we stand at this point.
Okay. Now, let's start with Mr. Fox. Any questions of Attorney Frankowski at this point?
No questions at this time.
Mr. Bars?
I do not have any questions at this time.
Mr. Gattone?
No questions.
Okay, and I don't have any questions at this point either. Mr. Paris, any questions at this point?
I do have a question with respect to the use of the building on Luzerne Street. I'm not sure if that could be best directed to Mr. Herrera or to the pastor. Do you have a preference, Mr. Frankowski?
Yeah, I think my client would be able to answer that. I mean, I could speak on his behalf. We talked about it earlier, and he was going to testify about it tonight anyway. But at this point, there's really no exact plans for the use of the Luzerne Street property. They are probably going to use it in the future once they do some interior kind of moving stuff around as a meeting room. just for Sunday school or for board meetings, conferences, things like that. It's not going to be used as a worship center. It's not going to have pews or an altar or anything like that in it. And I know that the code indicates that for a worship facility, there's got to be one space for every 4 seats. It's not going to have pews, so the seats would apply in this case. And I guess that would limit them to having 32 seats in the Luzerne property, because they would have 8 parking spaces left over from the 27. And my clients would be more than willing to stipulate or have a restriction placed in any approval that they're given that that property would be limited to 32 people at a time, and 32 seats for any meetings that they may have in there.
That's all the question I have at this point.
Okay, Mr. Price, any questions at this point?
Yeah, I was just curious. I thought you said that the new addition was going to be added to the Luzerne Street property. Is that correct, Ms. Frank?
No, the addition it will still be added to the existing structure, the existing church at 1124. The Luzerne Street right now stands as like a single family dwelling, and it would just be converted in use to a worship facility, but not in the traditional sense. It would be a meeting room for Sunday school or the board or whatever they needed.
Okay, I was just confused. I thought you said by moving the addition over there, you gained additional parking spaces, but I guess you're just by using part of that property for parking, you'll add additional parking, correct?
Correct. And I can pull up the plans, Attorney Price, if you want to see them. I don't know if you had a chance to look at them yet.
No, that's okay. I got it.
Okay. Attorney Frankowski, do you have anybody else that you would like to testify at this point or talk us through anything before I go to Attorney Lewis?
I did have questions for my client, because obviously, the application that is being considered is for a special exception for the use of the property. And I kind of wanted to go through that testimony so it's of record. I don't know if you wanted to hear from Attorney Lewis first, or if you wanted me to go through my whole spiel.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is Attorney Lewis, if I may at least just have an opportunity to address the board before we get into testimony.
Sure. How about you hold off Attorney Frankowski for a little bit, and then we'll get back to you, okay?
Okay.
All right, Mr. Lewis.
Good evening. Good evening, members of the board. As you know, I represent the adjoining property owners. And much of what Attorney Frankowski has represented, I do agree with. The applicants did take time to meet with my clients. I met with them, in fact, on site, and we talked through various concerns that our clients have and I believe expressed in the prior hearing when I was not present. We seem to have come up with some solutions, and we've now seen new iterations of plans to incorporate the adjoining property. And we agree that on some level, the revisions to the plan make some of our concerns a little bit less severe, but in some ways, I think they may actually increase the negative impacts of the proposal on my client's property. My client and I are not here this evening to try and thwart this project, and I want to make sure that that is clear. Rather, we're here because we obviously have unique impacts, unique concerns, being immediately adjacent and sharing a driveway with the original, what is now a church property. We believe a number of the significant impacts of this proposal can be mitigated, but as of this afternoon, we are advised that the applicant is unwilling to agree to the conditions that we believe are necessary to mitigate those impacts. The applicant here is seeking a host of variances, numerous variances for both properties. In fact, I would submit they're seeking a use variance on Luzerne because they're asking for relief from dimensional requirements that are necessary to make the use even permitted. In that case, this board obviously has the authority to impose reasonable conditions to mitigate the impacts of the relief that would be granted. I have sent to Mr. Paris the proposed conditions of my client would ask be applied to any relief granted, and I'm happy to run through them. They are brief. most importantly, as I believe was expressed previously, we have a situation with a shared driveway that experiences a number of impacts from the church and adjoining property owners. We have cut through traffic, and we also now will have dramatically increased usage of that driveway by the church. Church parishioners to date, and I'm sure in the future, have continued to use my client's parking, which is limited in and of itself. We have requested some very reasonable conditions that we think can help address that concern. One would be to install a pork chop, a raised pork chop at the end of the drive to dissuade people from turning onto the alley to the right from the shared drive. And why is that important? Well, people are going to see this new widened area, paved area, and persons that are not entitled to utilize this driveway have and will continue to use it as a cut through if they are not dissuaded to do so. With the installation of a pretty minor improvement, we believe that we can dissuade that traffic with a raised median. And with respect to these concerns, we've asked that while they are there striping their parking, that they restripe our parking, most importantly, to make sure that the parking is angled properly, given now they have one-way circulation being proposed for their facility, and so that appropriate signage could be installed on those parking spaces to indicate that those spaces are not to be used by the church. But most importantly, I think in terms of the conditions, is this plan relies completely on the reopening of the currently unopened alleyway that would connect Luzerne to Schuylkill. Without the opening of that alleyway, their entire project is not feasible. And there's no indication that I have received that the city has approved the opening of that alleyway. And so we would ask that any relief granted by this board be strictly conditioned on the approval by the city of the opening of that alleyway.
Okay, thank you. At this point, Mr. Fox, any questions of Mr. Lewis, of Attorney Lewis?
I have none.
Mr. Gattone, any questions of Attorney Lewis?
Again, just the concern, and we're back to that a couple months ago, the egress and ingress. We got to make certain that everybody knows what their parking restrictions are. That's a big deal.
Okay, Mr. Bars, any questions?
No, I do not.
Okay, Mr. Paris.
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Price.
Yeah, Mr. Lewis, when you say a pork chop where that alley is, I'm unfamiliar with that term.
Sure. You know, right at the end of our parking, and I'm not sure, Mr. Paris, if we can bring up a plan or not on your screen. I'm happy to use that. It's easier to describe that way. Really a traffic calming or traffic directional device. Perfect. So if you can see the dimension right near the cursor that says 29.88 feet.
Yeah.
That area is unused. It's not utilized for parking. It's currently simply paved. If that area is raised slightly with curbing and then filled in with concrete, you essentially make a concrete median of that island. And it is ever so slightly curved, leading traffic to the left, but not entering into the actual alleyway. That will dissuade anybody from utilizing our shared access to then make a right-hand turn onto the alley, which we believe once people realize that they can't make that, people will no longer utilize this as a cut through to get to other properties that are not entitled to the use of this alleyway.
And so it would be a left turn enhancement onto that alleyway.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Now I got it.
And that's really a safety measure here as well. I mean, you're going to have this area improved. You're going to have the addition of the additional church traffic coming through here and so forth. So trying to dissuade cut through traffic is important, I believe, not only for my client, but for the safety of everybody involved.
All right, thank you.
If I may, Mr. Rabina, just to comment on the cut through issue. If you think about it, in reality, the cut through issue isn't really an issue that this addition is creating or that the church is creating. This is an issue that's been ongoing for some time now, ever since the church was initially constructed. And so my client's position is that putting that in, you know, he can't control what the people that live back here and are using the driveway do. I mean, the plans are being presented and what we're asking for didn't cause that issue to happen. I mean, it's been an issue that's been happening for some time, and it's not necessarily my client's responsibility to control what these people using the drive aisle and alley are doing. I mean, it's a shared drive aisle.
I don't disagree with what Ms. Frankowski is stating to the board. However, this proposal is asking and is essentially showing they're going to utilize this shared driveway for a property that does not have any legal right to use it, which is the Luzerne Street property. My clients have shown a willingness to allow the Luzerne Street property to utilize this access under a reasonable condition. Otherwise, my client needs to look at closing off that driveway to the alley, which I believe my client would have the right to do. So instead of closing off this driveway, which would essentially destroy this project, we're asking for a very reasonable and modest accommodation, which is to try and dissuade cut-through traffic. Otherwise, you have a proposal that has no legal right to utilize that driveway, and one that I think fails on its face. So we think it's a very reasonable accommodation in light of the alternative.
Okay,
and I just, in brief response, I mean, I'm not sure that I agree that they have the legal right to just cut off this whole shared, I mean, it's a joint easement. So I would disagree with that. And I mean, it's not something that we have to fight over today, but I would disagree with that assessment. But I would also say that the people who are going to be using the Luzerne Street property are going to have access to from the alleyway that is being opened. If we just pulled the plans up a little, Mr. Paris, from Luzerne Street as well. And the people that are using the church and the Luzerne Street property are not going to be turning right ever into this alleyway. They're going to be turning left to get to the parking spaces over here or to the Luzerne Street property. Alternatively, they'll be using Luzerne Street itself and that alleyway. So I go back to my initial statement that I'm not sure that it's my client's responsibility to deal with the people who are cutting through that don't have a right to be at either property.
How would they access, if they were to come up Luzerne Street and say that alley was open, how are they going to turn left to go into those parking lots or parking spaces if they're angled to the right? I mean,
agreed.
I mean, supposing that the Corns can block off the shared driveway because the Luzerne Street property doesn't have a legal right of ingress and egress over it. I mean, we're talking about fighting over something that's not a huge monetary investment, I would think, and that benefits a property that doesn't already have the benefit of the shared driveway. I mean, have you priced this stuff out?
Well, the original plans, and the reason that my client's hesitant to agree to be doing all these extra things is because to open this alley and to deal and to put the Luzerne property in use in conjunction with the proposed addition costs a lot more. I mean, the expenditure has really, really increased in the difference between the first set of plans, which did not include any of this, to the second set of plans, which is now, you know, dealing with the whole Luzerne Street property as well. So, you know, part of it is a cost concern as well.
Well, but see, the problem is you're telling us the cost, but we don't have the cost. I mean, if you're spending $1,000 to put the pork chop in, isn't that a lot better than having the Corns blockaded out and spend $10,000 litigating it? I mean,
I agree with that, Attorney Price. And again, you know, if the board decides to condition this on the pork chop being there, my client will have to comply with that or decide to scrap the plans. So it's ultimately, if that's something that the board wants, then fine. I'm just giving you my understanding of why my client is hesitant to agree to it.
And the line striping and the signage seems to me to be an insignificant amount of money and would reinforce the parishioners not to use those parking spaces for the laundromat. I'm just trying to get down. The whole idea that we gave you the continuance the last time was to try to come to reasonable conclusions and solutions. And now your people add more and more onto it, and they don't seem to want to do those.
Right. And part of the reason that they did add so much onto it was to try to really alleviate a lot of the concerns by adding so much more parking, by opening this alley and widening the other two alleys. I mean, my client really did do this with the intent of trying to make it easier for everybody, including the Corns, especially with respect to the traffic issue. I mean, if we want to take a brief pause in the proceeding, I can talk to my client and maybe talk him into it. But at this point in time, I don't think that I have the authority to agree to any stipulations.
It doesn't matter whether they agree to it or not tonight, because the board is going to render a decision. And if they put conditions on, there are going to be conditions that are going to be required. I don't know what the board is going to do, but there doesn't seem to be any more. I don't mean to speak for the board, but I think the board knows the issues here and can look at the plan, and and if I get it down, it's the pork chop and the line striping and the signage seem to be the problems that you face if they're put in as conditions. Is that right, Mr. Lewis?
And I think the other one goes without saying, that they would have to obtain approval from the city to open that alleyway. Right. That if the alleyway can't be opened, that the relief is null and void, which I assume that the board was going to apply that anyway, but I wanted to make sure to put that on the record.
Right. So, I mean, the issues about the use and the expansion of the nonconformity and all those other things, those were already in front of the board. So they already heard the testimony on that. Is there any other testimony that would be relevant with respect to these issues?
Well, Attorney Price, I think because we added another application to the mix with the Luzerne Street property, there has been no testimony at all about the use, the special exception for the use of the Luzerne Street property, the dimensional variance that we've requested. And so, I think there would have to be testimony on the record for those two items.
Then let's get into that, because we already know about the other issues, so we can keep this moving.
Yes, I think that's a good idea, Mr. Price. Okay. Can we take that? Well, maybe we should leave that plan up.
Yeah.
So why don't we discuss the Luzerne property? Go ahead.
Okay. And I believe my client's already sworn in, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
State his name again for the record.
Norberto Acevedo. That's Norberto. Last name Acevedo, Acevedo.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Acevedo, are you familiar with the property located at 1119 Luzerne Street?
Yes, I am.
And is that property owned by Iglesia Pentecostal Movimiento de Fe Incorporated?
Yes, it is.
All right, and is that the same entity that owns the property at 1124 Schuylkill Avenue?
Yes, it is.
All right. What is currently located on 1119 Luzerne Street?
Just a brick home.
Is it a single family dwelling?
Yeah, single family dwelling.
Is anyone residing in that property?
No.
And so that dwelling is currently vacant?
It's been vacant, yeah, since we bought it.
Okay. So the church wanted to make 1119 Luzerne Street part of the plans to expand the church and add the addition, correct?
Yes.
And so you were required to submit another zoning hearing application to the city to do that?
Yes, we did.
And did you have an engineer come up with the new revised plans for the addition to the church in conjunction with the use of the Luzerne Street property?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And I guess these would be marked as Exhibit 7, I think we're on at this point from the continuation.
No, 8.
8, yeah.
8, okay. And Mr. Paris, if you don't mind, can I just do a share screen on mine so that I can navigate through? Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Can everyone see that? Did it pop up?
Yep.
Yep.
And I'm just going to take you through. There's four sheets that are part of these plans. This is sheet 1. And is this, Mr. Acevedo, the way that the property currently exists?
Yeah.
And that's Luzerne Street that my arrow is going over on the left.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the 1124 Schuylkill Ave property?
Yes.
Okay. Turning to sheet 2, is this the part of the plans that show how you intend to use Luzerne Street in conjunction with the Schuylkill Avenue property?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly like that.
All right. And we already heard testimony in the previous hearing regarding the size of the addition to the church, what it's going to look like inside, what you're going to do with it.
Yeah.
None of that testimony has changed from that time, right?
No, everything the same.
So focusing on the Luzerne Street property only then, I know you also provided floor plans. I just need to find them, I'm sorry. Are these the floor plans that were created for the Luzerne Street property?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you going to change anything in the interior of the Luzerne Street property for it to be used as a worship facility?
Right now, no.
And when you do, is it just going to be sort of interior renovations?
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of activities do you foresee taking place in the Luzerne Street property? What's it going to be used for?
Just probably like conference and youth meetings and that stuff.
Okay, speak up a little so the court reporter and the board can hear you.
For small conference and for the youth meeting.
And do you know right now when those activities would take place during the week?
Right now, if they will take place, will be on Tuesdays, and meetings will be on Saturdays.
Okay. And how many people do you expect to be there for a meeting or a youth meeting?
25 to 30.
Okay. No more than 30?
Nah.
Do you believe that using the Luzerne property as a worship facility would create increased traffic congestion along any of the streets?
Not really, because it's the same membership, same people from the congregation.
Okay, so the same people from the congregation using the church would be using that property as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it would create any unreasonable concentration of population?
No.
Do you think it would be a threat to public health or safety?
No.
Do you believe that using the property as a worship facility would generate any nuisances or hazards to your neighbors?
No.
And do you believe it would adversely affect the value of any of your neighboring properties?
No.
One of the issues that we're facing is that the lot that the Luzerne Street property is on does not meet the size requirements for a worship facility. Do you think that the size of the lot, the dimensions of the lot are going to cause any negative effect on the use of the property as a worship facility?
I don't believe so.
And is that because you're only going to be using it for small meetings and not large worship services?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you're already going to have the large church for those bigger services.
Yes.
And the Luzerne property would be used sort of as just an accessory use to the church.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Going back to sheet 2 of the site plans, these show the proposed off-street parking. And based on these revised plans, there are 20 off-street parking spaces shown at the Schuylkill Avenue property, correct?
Yeah, to my knowledge, yes.
And then on the Luzerne property, there are 15 parking spaces shown, correct?
Yes.
And so would you allow parishioners to use any spaces at the church or the Luzerne Street property to be able to use either facility?
Yes, that's the purpose.
So in total, the church would have the ability to use 35 off-street parking spaces total?
Exactly, yes.
And do you believe that that amount of parking spaces would be sufficient for not only the use of the church, but also for the use of the Luzerne Street property at the same time?
I believe so, yes.
And do you have any ideas going forward or currently about how you are controlling parking and making sure that people aren't parking where they're not supposed to be?
Right now, we have assigned a security officer who will be parking the cars. So we don't have this issue that they're saying we're parking in their parking spaces.
Okay, so you're going to have an individual, a human, controlling where the parishioners are parking.
Yes. When we have service, the cars are coming in. There's somebody going to be there. They're going to park the cars where they're supposed to be parked at.
Okay. And is that someone that you're going to employ?
That's somebody that's voluntarily devoting their time for that.
Okay, so it's going to be a volunteer.
Yeah, it's going to be volunteer, yes.
All right. And if you can't expand the properties in conjunction with one another as proposed in these plans, that would be a hardship for the church, correct?
It would be a very hardship for the church, yes.
And is that because the church already owns both of the properties?
Yes.
And has for quite some time?
Yes.
Would you need to relocate your operations to accommodate your congregation if you couldn't expand the way that you're seeking to expand?
Yeah, that'll be the next thing we have to do. We will have to move, buy a place, and set it up for it to be, to be worth it to us. We have spent a lot of money in that place.
In 2015, when you got your initial variance and renovated it.
Mm-hmm.
Would using these properties as proposed in the plans impair the use or development of any neighboring or adjacent properties?
Not in any way.
Would using these properties as proposed in the plans be bad for the public in any way?
No, it would be better for the public.
Why is that? Because
it's a service for the community, and the people there in Reading, we have a lot of congregations, and there's pretty many that don't have no stations where they can park their cars. So that place is useful for the people.
Would using these properties as proposed in the plans alter the character of the neighborhood in any way?
No.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add or tell the board?
Well, I would like to tell the board to, take into consideration what we have done with that property on Schuylkill Avenue, which when we bought it was nothing but a property that was all destroyed. And the church has invested quite a lot of money in that place. And for us to move out of there simply because of a parking issue is, I think the congregation is going to see it as it's not fair since they invested so much money into it. I asked the board to take in consideration what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve the neighborhood. We're trying to improve the place. And I'm hopefully that, I'm praying the Lord that the Lord would touch and let the decision be made to what we are asking for.
I have no further questions at this point.
Okay, I'm going to go to the board next. Mr. Fox, any questions?
Yes, based on what I just heard the pastor say, he said that there would be somebody parking the cars. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Then I would wonder if a number of cars would come at the same time. You could have cars backed up under the street, could you not?
Oh, not really, because this guy will be assigning the cars where they're supposed to be parking, sir. Because according to what we're hearing, some of the people are parking in Mr. Thorne's parking space, but we have been working with that since this issue came up 4 or 5 months back.
But you don't see a possibility of 6 or 7 cars, people come at the same time? He can't park those cars fast enough, can he?
Mr. Fox, he's going to be directing the cars where to park. He's not going to be a valet parking. He's going to...
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
I misunderstood that.
Okay,
Thank you,
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Price.
Yep.
Okay.
No questions.
Anything else, Mr. Fox?
No.
Okay, Mr. Bars.
No, I have no further questions.
Okay. Mr. Gattone.
No questions.
Okay. Mr. Paris?
I have a question, and this is just with regard to the dimensional relief that's being requested. And that is, on the site plan, it indicates that the Luzerne Street property is not compliant as it exists currently with height and with certain setback, with all of the setbacks actually, but not only the front, but the rear and side as well. And in the variance application, it references the front yard setback, but does not mention the other setbacks or the height. My question is, and are you requesting relief from all of those, or is there any other, you're not proposing any changes to comply with the setbacks for the other?
Yeah, we would request a variance for all of the dimensional requirements.
Thank you.
Mr. Price?
No questions.
Okay. Is there anybody else out there that has any questions?
Mr. Lewis.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Attorney Lewis?
Mr. Acevedo, your plan, the sheet that's up on the screen now, we can stay there. It does not provide any dimensions for the parking spaces located on the Luzerne property. Do you know what size those stalls are proposed to be?
Is Dan Longeslayer here? Dan, are you here? Okay. The minimum typical dimension that the parkings will have will be 9 feet by 18.
For all of the parking spaces on Luzerne?
Yes, sir.
And they will all be paved, correct?
Yes. Let me go back a little bit. Is Dan, David, do you know if Dan is present on the list of attendees?
I'm checking now. I see a phone number connection that still is self-muted. I prompted him to unmute to see if that was him.
I believe
I'm trying to tell from his, I think that's his phone number.
Yes.
Mr. Herrera testified that they're going to comply with the Reading zoning requirement being 9 by 18 and that they will be paved. Correct, Mr. Herrera?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Acevedo, the dwelling located on Luzerne Street, you said that is currently vacant?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, vacant. It's been vacant since we purchased that.
Is there anything that makes it so that it can't be used as a residence?
Oh yeah, we could have used it as a resident. It was totally brought back to resident usage. The problem is that we have already applied for a tax exempt status on it, so we left it empty because we didn't want to use it as a residence.
But it could be even used as a residence, as a parsonage, or for yourself or somebody associated with the church, correct?
Well, I have talked to somebody about that, and they said that's not permissible. I didn't question it anymore, but that's the way I was informed from somebody in the where they ran. You have to, where you go to for the permits, they say that was not permissible.
Mr. Acevedo, the Luzerne Street property, am I correct that that property is relatively flat?
Yeah.
Am I also correct that it's essentially rectangular? There's nothing unique about the shape of that property?
No, it's just a single brick building.
Mr. Acevedo, you mentioned that in your testimony that you would allow the Schuylkill Avenue property to have access to all of the parking spaces on the Luzerne property. Will you agree to have a cross easement agreement drafted and recorded to ensure that those parking spaces are always available?
You're speaking about from the Schuylkill Avenue to the Luzerne lot?
Yes.
According to the plans that they have developed, there will be a throughway from the Schuylkill Avenue to the Luzerne.
I'm talking about a binding document that would make sure that for as long as the Schuylkill Avenue property is going to use this addition, that legally those parking spaces would be made available. It's called an easement agreement. Would you agree to have an easement agreement recorded so that we know that those parking spaces will always be available?
Oh, yes.
Louis, I
Yes.
think if the board were to grant this approval, they would make the Luzerne Street property and the Schuylkill Street property be put on one deed, so that would not be an issue.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And Mr. Acevedo, have you had any communications with the city with regard to opening the remainder of that alley and whether or not they will permit that?
No, we haven't had it because we're waiting to see if there's an approval on what we are planning to do.
Okay. Mr. Acevedo, I think in your prior testimony, the last hearing, you talked about not needing necessarily as much parking as the ordinance requires because a number of your parishioners arrive on a bus. Is that accurate?
Yes, we have a bus service, and we have riders that people from the church, they pick them up and they take them to church.
And if a bus arrives here, where will that bus park?
There's a special parking set up for that bus. It's a 15-passenger van.
Where is that special parking space on this plan?
That's supposed to be the first one. That's supposed to be the first parking as you come in from Schuylkill Avenue to the premises.
And you believe that that parking space is large enough to fit a 15-passenger van?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Mr. Price, do you have anything you would like to add at this time, or anybody you think we should?
I think, Ms. Frankowski, you don't have any other witnesses, right?
I was gonna have Mr. Laudenslayer testify just to kind of explain the plans a little more to the board if
they're pretty self-explanatory, I think.
Yeah, I think at this point that's kind of a moot issue.
Okay, that's fine. Then I don't need him to testify if the board's satisfied with the plans, you know, and don't have any questions about them.
Mr. Lewis, do you have any witnesses?
I do not. I think the Corns spoke for themselves, as I understand it last time, expressed themselves pretty well. I don't need to belabor those points. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Paris, do you have anything you would like to, any questions or any comments you would like to add?
I do just have a brief comment, and that is, and this is noted in our staff report, but this entire project on both parcels, if approved by zoning, would also need to go to the through the land development and subdivision approval process. And as part of that process, that would entail getting approvals from the Public Works Department for the opening of driveways and all of that. So I do have some thoughts, and we've noted some things about that process, but really I think that will be addressed in more detail with the Planning Commission, but only if zoning approval would be granted. So we would just ask that to be included as a condition, as we noted in our report.
Okay, Any board members have anything they want to add? No? Okay, well, we'll close this appeal for this evening. We thank all of you for your patience. This is a rather complex issue, to say the least, in some ways, and in other ways, it's pretty simple. So you've given us a lot to think about, and we will issue a decision at next month's meeting. It'll either be by Zoom or in person, and decisions will be mailed to the parties after we render our decision. So we thank all of you. And
thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great night.
Thank you.
Okay. Sandra, are you okay yet?
I am, thank you.
All right, the next matter before us is Appeal 2020-16. It's 1403 Chester Street, and it's O'Neill and O'Neill Partnership, and they're appealing a zoning enforcement notice issued in July 14 of 2020 for a variance to establish a self-storage facility with relief from dimensional variances. And this is in an R3 residential district. Attorney Mark Kuck is representing the applicant. So why don't we begin? We'll swear in our zoning officer first.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Has notice for this appeal been given?
Yes, it has.
Okay, Mr. Price.
Thanks. I'll put some exhibits into the record. Exhibit number 1 is the notice. Exhibit number 2 is proof of publication of the notice. Exhibit number 3 is proof of publication of the notice.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting that. There's background noise.
Exhibit number 1 is the notice. Exhibit number 2 is proof of posting of the notice. Exhibit number 3 is proof of publication of the notice. Exhibit number 4 is the zoning application, including all of its attachments. And exhibit number 5 is the zoning ordinance of the city of Reading as amended.
Okay, thank you. Attorney Kuck, do you want to enter your appearance, and then anybody you're going to have to testify, we'll have them sworn in at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Kuck here on behalf of the applicant, Kuck & Kuck, 217 North 6th Street, Reading, PA 19601. With me this evening, ladies and gentlemen, I have 2 witnesses. One is Mr. Harry O'Neill, who is sitting on my right-hand side here. And then we also have Mr. John Hoffert to testify to the plans that are part of the application.
Okay, do you want to swear both of them in at this point?
We both, please raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I will try to be brief this evening. I know you've already had one hearing, but what we're talking about this evening is 1403 Chester Street. That is owned by O'Neill and O'Neill, which is a partnership. Mr. Harry O'Neill is one of the members of that partnership. And with that being said, you've been sworn, Mr. O'Neill, and we'll go ahead and jump right into the testimony. And as I typically remind the board, technical matters, certainly if you have questions, can be held for Mr. Hoffer, because he'll be able to testify about the technical matters of the actual application. So, Mr. O'Neill, you've been sworn. What is your business address, please?
My business address is 1440 Carbon Street.
And is that in the general vicinity of this property?
That is attached to this property.
And so essentially, you are also involved in a number of businesses, including Empire.
I have the Empire Wrecking, the Empire, the Elk Environmental, Delaware Valley Contracting, Delaware Valley Utility, and Burke's Transfer, all of which are based out of this facility.
And would that be just immediately to basically the east of this property?
Yes.
Now, Mr. O'Neill, how long have you been familiar with this area of the city? Most of your life, if not all of it?
I have, actually, I lived on Chester Street at one time, and we have occupied the corner. We started at the corner in 1955 and expanded our way as our business grew down through acquiring this piece of property in around 1990, if I remember right.
So if I would tell you it was 1996 as reflected on the deed that's in
Yep.
the record, would you agree with me?
Yep, I agree with that. Yep.
Now, when you acquired the 1403 Chester Street property, which we're talking about this evening, was it being used as a used car sales lot for as long as you can remember?
Yes, that was a used car sales lot from the time that I'm going to tell you in the 50s. I actually, again, lived right in the neighborhood and played there as a kid. Yep.
So the significance of that is it's always had a commercial nature to it as long as you can remember. Is that right?
Right. That was a used car lot, and the building adjoining that or right next to that was a gas station. Yes.
So when you acquired the property in 1996, tell the board, if you would, what did you start doing with the property at that point in time?
At that point, there was a used car lot there. There was they had their office and their storage buildings there for their car lot. We at that point expanded to use for our storage. Had an office trailer there at the same time, which I kept salespeople working out of, and have used it for that purpose, since we have acquired it.
So at that time, were you also parking vehicles on that property?
Yes, we have parked vehicles there.
And have you also put various containers there over time?
Various containers, we move in and out as we needed storage. Again, ours is a seasonal business, so you hit the middle of the winter, you're clamoring for place to go with stuff, and you hit into summer, everything is out and rolling. It's ever changing.
And now, Mr. O'Neill, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your history. Not only do you operate the businesses you've spoken about, but you're also a bit of a developer. Is that right?
Yes,
so you've
developed quite a few things. Yep.
So you've built residential properties, you've built developments, and you've built commercial properties.
Yes, I have built hundreds of houses and have developed several thousand acres through the years.
Now, the reasoning for this is that with respect to the 1403 Chester Street lot, right? Currently, there's no permanent structures on there other than the billboard that exists. Is that right?
That's true. Yes.
But if you could explain to the board, do you believe in your experience that this is more of a commercial lot than it is a residential lot?
Well, certainly it is it's commercial in use because of its proximity to the highway and the noise and its proximity to the rest of my business. And particularly with the expansion that's coming to the highway and the Excel ramps that are going to come along there, which actually is one of the reasons that we're looking at creating some more storage space.
So talking about the lot in particular, Mr. Hofford will get into this a little bit, but we're talking about a lot that's about 15,424 square feet. Is that right?
Yes.
So we've got Chester Street on essentially let's call it the southwestern side, right?
Right.
We also then have Route 12 and the bypass on the south side. And then your commercial property basically to the east. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
Now, I wanted to just touch on something. I believe the board's aware that PennDOT is currently in the process of widening Route 12 in the very vicinity of this property. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And is it your understanding in your discussions with PennDOT that there is going to be an acceleration ramp that comes along the front of this property?
Yeah, so we know distinctively that it is going to start at Carbon and it is going to end somewhere around the front of this property.
And one of your concerns, if I understand it, is that with acceleration ramps, you're going to have increased noise coming from the highway as opposed to decreased noise.
Yes, absolutely.
Because cars will be accelerating as they're working their way onto the highway. Is that right? Now, you would like to make reasonable use of this property. Is that fair?
Yes.
Do you, in your experience, believe that this property at 1403 Chester Street makes a good site for a residential home?
No, and not at all. Like I said, I lived on that block at one time, and it just doesn't fit to spend the dollars or to do anything of that residential abutting to my business and or the highway. It just doesn't make sense at all.
Now, we'll get into this a little bit later with Mr. Hofford, but there's also some topography issues with this lot as well, right?
Yes, there is. Yep.
The access to this lot comes in off of Chester Street. Is that right?
It does.
And you cannot access the Route 12 bypass from Chester Street, can you?
No, No.
So in fact, PennDOT has closed that there's no way to
No,
intersect that.
There on that side of Route 12, there is no access to the highway at all.
But this property is right up against the right of way.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if the board looks at the north, let's call it the eastern side of the property, is there a billboard there currently?
Yes.
That would be this in between your other property and this property.
Right. Yes, there is.
And do you know offhand, is that a billboard with Lamar Advertising?
Yes, it is.
And so Lamar has a lease on that and they have the right to do what they want with it.
Right. That is Lamar's billboard and they lease the ground from me.
You indicated to me that there's the significance of that billboard is that it's lit at night. Is that right?
Yes.
Does that light up the whole property?
Yeah, it lights up enough that we use it for the security of that lot for the storage that we do there.
Would that be another reason it wouldn't make a lot of sense to put a residential unit in that particular lot?
Yes, I would say. And if we go to the other side of the lot, across Chester Street, there's another billboard sign, which again, so the both sides of the lot are hit by light from billboard signs.
All right. So you've already talked a little bit about the noise coming from the highway, which is not conducive to a residential use of that lot. Have you reached a conclusion based on what you have used the lot for the past 26 or 27 years that storage is an appropriate use for this spot?
Yes, I believe it's absolutely appropriate, whether it is for us or whether it's for a third party, but storage makes the right sense for this lot.
And you would have limited traffic coming and going, is that right?
Right, yes.
And you would not expect a high volume of use because it's a low number of units.
Yes, absolutely.
And would you agree with me that the plan that's drawn by Mr. Hofford at the moment proposes 34 10 by 10 units?
Right.
And one 10 by 20 unit in the corner.
Right, and that 10 by 20 unit only has access on a 10-foot piece. So there's no way that a person could store vehicles in any of these units. These units are small and not set up to have a lot of traffic around there.
And you're also not proposing any exterior storage, is that right?
No exterior storage.
So everything that would be allowed if this board were to grant your use would take place inside the buildings.
Right, yes.
And once again, I think you testified this would allow you to make reasonable use of this property moving forward. Is that right?
Right, that's it. I mean, at this point, we do store equipment on it. And at this point, as we would go through this program, we would store some of our stuff there as we continued to expand to put this together. It's not something we're going to build overnight. So we would be keeping but would not be any third party outside storage.
Based on the fact that you are familiar with this neighborhood in general for the better part of your life, do you believe that there would be any negative impact on the surrounding properties with this storage facility?
I don't think so.
Would you in fact be willing to live on Chester Street? Not this lot, let me ask you this question. Would you be willing to live on this lot in question?
I would have no interest in living on this lot. I'm going to tell you that 3 doors up the street, I knocked on the door in the last 90 days and asked the people to sell me the house, which I built back in the 60s, and said I'd move back onto that block, but I would be far enough away from the highway and close enough to work.
But the significance of that is you are actually trying to move back to Chester Street.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly move back to Chester Street, but even though I would move to Chester Street, I would not move there. Yeah.
And finally, Mr. O'Neill, the idea of proposing what you have on this plan, does that kind of tidy up the property and make it more presentable and neater?
I think over the long run, yes.
I have no further questions for Mr. O'Neill at this moment, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Let's start with Mr. Fox. Any questions?
No questions, sir. Mr.
Gattone, any questions?
I just, first time I ever heard the thing, acceleration lane. It's right now a 2-lane highway. Have you, and this also, they indicated that they're talking about widening it, widening Route 12. Is that going to impact taking the land that you own? I mean, have you any indication on that?
What we do know is at the corner of Carbon. We have met with PennDOT and are having a discussion right now on how much of that corner they are going to take from us, and then how far the how it's going to continue from there
To the
west towards this property. We're not sure what's going on there. We know, but they are going to, if you're familiar with the area where the stop sign is to get onto 12, that stop sign's going away. They're going to cut into what used to be our gas station, which is a used car lot, and they're going to come down through there, creating a full lane for acceleration to get out into the highway.
So there will be a third lane added there, Mr. Gattone.
Okay.
Yes.
And that lane will be designed specifically for cars to accelerate onto the highway. So,
Yep. We do know that they are certainly going to take our driveway access on the neighboring property and eliminate that. And they are going back to their ultimate right of way. But how that's cleaning out, you know, they've already said, hey, how are you going to get back on? How are you as a contractor going to get in and off of this site? Because your access on the 12, we're taking from you. And that's the discussion we are in right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Gattone?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bars?
No, I have no questions.
Okay, I have no questions at this time. Want to continue, Mr. Cook?
Thank you
Excuse
very
me,
much.
wait a minute. Mr. Price, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Paris, any questions?
Very quick, one quick question. You had mentioned about the lighting that's provided from the billboard. Are you, if this were approved, would you also be adding any additional lighting for security? And would you be able to submit a lighting plan if so?
Yeah, I mean, we will submit whatever we do for lighting or anything there would get, you know, municipal approval. I think that the city and the people there know that we're going to follow things. We just got done moving into what was the B&G Glass building, and everything they asked for, we gave them, and plus, we're not, what you guys want, we're giving you. We are a dedicated city business.
Don't say whatever they want, you're going to give them. Hang on.
Well, I just, they told me to put smoke detectors or sprinklers in my new building, and then I got sprinklers, and then I put $30,000 worth of smoke detectors in also, but yeah.
So Mr. Paris, just to kind of summarize, Mr. Hoffert will testify that we understand that you're suggesting land development will be necessary, and we will, of course, comply with that. Yeah. This is kind of unique with billboards on either side and the lighting there. So whatever we have to work out with the lighting, we understand we'll work with you.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, I do see one person in the audience with a hand raised.
Oh, okay. I don't see that on my screen, but put them on.
The screen name is Carlos.
Oh.
Yes.
May I have your full name, please, Carlos?
Yeah, my name is Carlos NG Jr.
Spell that.
NG Jr.
Thank you.
Okay. Carlos, what's your question?
Yesterday I got this letter from the city saying that it's going to be storage built on the corner of the highway, I guess. And my concern is they blocked this street because there was a lot of accidents going out.
If there's a question.
Yeah. What's
it's
your
not a question, it's a concern. It's a concern because I live on 1425 Chester. And by open this street, it's going to be a mess. So I'm kind of concerned about that.
Okay.
They're not opening this street, sir. The street will stay.
I heard you're gonna be open. That's why you say.
No. They're going to add another lane onto Route 12. They're not opening Chester Street onto Route 12. So it won't look like.
I heard you saying that PennDOT closed the street, and you guys are gonna open the street to access to Route 12.
No, that's not happening.
That's not happening. Okay.
Nope.
That was my question.
All right. Well, thank you for participating.
Okay. And maybe Mr. Hoffert, you could, I don't know, do you have a map that you could show Mr. Carlos what they were kind of doing? I don't know if you could talk him through that or not.
Yeah, but the only thing that I can say at this point in time is, let me turn my speaker down just a bit there. I think, Dave, do you have the exhibit that we turned in relative to the exhibit to the application? Yes. Okay. You see the screen, Mr. NG?
Yeah.
Okay. If we may just toggle up to view it, there we are. As you already know, at the terminus of Chester Street, there is a barricade or a bollard system set up that no one can drive through onto Orange Street bypass. That will remain in effect. Okay. The only thing that this project will be doing is accessing Chester Street from the existing driveway that's there today. We plan on narrowing that driveway down to a reasonable width. I think it's about 30 feet or so now, but we'll be accessing the site down at that lower end of the property exclusively. So any traffic generated going to this facility will come down Chester Street, turn left or go north somewhat into the site, and will come back out and exit via Chester Street. That's the only thing that's being proposed by this plan relative to
traffic. Okay, that's another concern. So basically everybody who's going to use the self-storage is going to go to Chester Street.
Yes,
so,
sir.
So we're going to have millions of people. I mean, how many boxes is going to be on the self-storage?
What happens is storage units are not visited every day. Matter of fact, it's statistically proven that the number of storage unit visits for this facility is less than a typical commercial facility. People may visit a storage facility once a month. This is not normally something that's visited every day. So even though there's a total of 34 units, the traffic on this particular street will not be greatly increased by this project, sir.
But I heard the owner of Carvin Street, I mean, the owner of this projects is the owner of Carvin Street business. Why didn't I open the street over there, the entrance over there?
This property is has its own frontage on Chester, and it's another property owner, an entity that owns the property to the north of this particular site. It's owned by Todd O'Neill at this time.
So guys, they're going to increase the traffic. It's going to be a mess.
I disagree with you, but you're entitled
to.
You
guys got a concern. You guys got a.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that at least you saw what was going on, and we understand what your concern is about that.
I appreciate it.
Okay, you're more than welcome. All right, Mr. Cook, do you have anything else to add?
Just I would like to call Mr. Hoffert and run through his testimony if the board thinks that's necessary.
Board members, do you want to hear from Mr. Hoffert? Anybody?
Any variances that are necessary?
Yes.
Why don't we go through the variances just to get them in the record?
I just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you, Mr. Price. So very briefly, gentlemen, I'm going to offer John Hoffert, who I think has testified in front of you dozens, if not up to hundreds of times. And Butch, what's your business address, please?
32 East Lancaster Avenue, Shillington, PA 19607.
All right, and Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I would offer Mr. Hoffert as an expert, as I have every time in the past in land planning and surveying.
Would say he's admitted.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hoffert, I'm going to kind of summarize the relief that we're discussing here tonight and just kind of walk you through it to try to keep things moving. But essentially, you've heard the testimony from Mr. O'Neill, and this property is in the R3 district, which is a residential district, correct?
That is correct.
We have two requested forms of relief relative to the use. Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
First is that there's an existing non-conforming use relative to storage, and we have requested a special exception under 600-607 in order to expand that storage facility beyond 20%. And in conjunction with that, we've also asked for a dimensional variance because the 20% expansion would not be enough. It would be approximately 200%, I think, based on the zoning administrator's review letter. Is that your understanding?
Those numbers are correct, and yes, that's my understanding.
The alternative form of relief for the board to consider is we're requesting a use variance under 600-804, I believe it is. And that is, in fact, to allow for a storage facility as a variance in the R3 district. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, in that concept, you heard Mr. O'Neill testify about the lot area, the topography, the Route 12 issues, the noise, the billboards, and the commercial nature of the property. Do you tend to agree with everything that he testified to there?
Yes, sir. Even though this is in the R3 zoning district, I would find it very difficult or very hard to understand why anyone would want to live on that particular lot, given those factors.
And in your opinion, any one of those factors, but more so the general nature of all of those factors coupled together, do you believe that generates a hardship for this property?
Absolutely.
So as we move through that, then the zoning administrator has determined that the R3 area and bulk requirements are applicable to this property. Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
And as you take a look at the actual building coverage, we'll just run through these very briefly. We comply with all of the area and bulk requirements with the exception of impervious coverage, not building coverage. I misspoke. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
The impervious coverage required under R3 is 80%, and we're proposing 69.5%. Is that correct?
That is correct.
However, because of the existence of steep slopes, we are required to reduce the impervious coverage allowed to 64%. Is that correct?
Yes, you must reduce the 80% by 20%, thus yielding the 64% allowed impervious coverage of this particular tract.
So with respect to area and bulk, front yard, rear yard, side yard, and building coverage, your understanding is we comply with all of that with our proposed development here.
No, we do comply, yes.
Do comply, yes, I'm sorry, that's what I meant.
Yep.
So, and except for the steep slope nature, we would comply with the impervious coverage as well.
That is correct. And I'd like to just point out or just clarify steep slopes. In this particular tract, even though it's only 15,000 square feet size, the steep slope ordinance that you have in effect at the city of Reading does not define how big or how steep it has to be other than the grade. Our steep area on this particular property is only 40 foot wide, and it's only 4 foot difference in elevation. It's roughly 13 foot from edge to edge.
Mr. Hoffer, can we get Mr. Paris to shift the screen for you so you can actually show that on the next sheet? There we go.
Okay, perfect. There it is. The crosshatched area right above the word container 3, that is what they call very steep slopes. On the average, that particular from point to point is roughly 40 foot in length. It's 13 foot wide, but it's only 4 foot difference in elevation. It's almost like a terrace in someone's front yard of a residential property. It's there. It qualifies as being a steep slope, but in actuality, it's only a little bump in the ground. So it's steep slope by definition, but it's not the steep slope that we, quote, need to typically protect as an environmentally sensitive area. It's just a terrace on this particular property.
So essentially, there's no quality of any environmental preservation for this particular physical feature. Is that fair to say?
If this was somewhere, anywhere near a creek corridor or some other sensitive area, this may be worth saving or protecting. In this particular case, not at all.
All right. So, Mr. Hoffer, your understanding then is under 600.819, right? That's the steep slope section of the ordinance, correct?
819, yes, sir.
And so because of this thin and skinny area and the actual slope of it, we qualify for not only moderately steep slopes, but steep slopes as well. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
Based on this ordinance, this is, and I believe the zoning administrator's analysis, this is a redevelopment, not a new development, because there's already existing impervious cover on this site. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
So based on the calculations that I think you prepared, the total area of the steep slope is about 12.9%. Is that right?
That's total of both types of steep slopes. Yes,
right.
Sir.
And so because of that, the ordinance allows development in up to 10%, but we're actually over that by 2.9%. Is that right?
Yes, and then because of that reason, we must comply with the steep slope overlay district.
So to the extent, and I'm just going to run down through the sections that we have identified as being applicable, but under 819D, the zoning administrator had indicated that to the extent that our application is not complete as it relates to steep slopes, we have requested a dimensional variance. Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
And I want to be clear for the board, the concept here would be that if the board is willing to grant the relief, that we will certainly move through the planning process and we will address all of those other issues as it relates to final plans and everything else. Is that right, Mr. Hoffert?
Yes, sir.
We've requested a variance, a dimensional variance from 819E if there is any negative impact to moderately steep slopes either determined now or at the planning phase. Is that right?
Yes.
With respect to 819F2, we are only allowed to disturb up to 10% of the very steep slopes. In fact, if we're permitted to move ahead with this project, we'd be disturbing 100% of the dark shaded area on the plan. Is that right?
Not necessarily. The part of the property that adjoins Wilbin Gonzalez, almost to the north side of this particular tract, that 5 or 6 foot side yard area will more than likely not be disturbed. So that steep slope area will remain intact in that area, but all other areas will be disturbed.
So to the extent that, and until we can actually work through planning and figure out, I guess, what, a retaining wall there?
Yes, we're proposing that.
We don't know how much is going to be disturbed, but in the event that we disturb more than we're allowed, we're asking for that dimensional variance. Is that fair?
That is correct. Due to grading, the concrete wall may require tiebacks. So those are the construction unknowns at this time, sir.
With respect to 819F3, the maximum impervious coverage is reduced from 80% to 64% because of the existence on this site of this long, thin strip of steep slope. Is that right?
That is correct.
And so the board's clear. We have requested a dimensional variance from not only 804A, which are the dimensional requirements, but also 819F3 in order to have the proposed impervious of 69.5% instead of the 64% allowed. Is that right?
That is correct. That additional 4.5% is being requested as relief.
600-819F4 prohibits buildings and uses on very steep slopes. Are we proposing buildings on steep slopes?
There's a small portion of some of the units on there, but in fact, what we're doing is we're going to regrade the site by eliminating that portion of those steep slopes and then holding back the rest of the natural ground by retaining walls. So yes, a portion will be built upon that property, but by the construction of the excavation as proposed, we'll actually be eliminating that steep slope area.
Same concept applies to 819F5. Accessory uses and driveways cannot be located on very steep slopes. So to the extent that any of the accesses or aisleways on the proposed site would be located in that area, we're requesting a dimensional variance as well. Is that right?
That is correct. And for the same reason, by construction methods, we will be eliminating that one section completely of that steep slope area.
Mr. Paris, if you could move back to the first page of the plan that is part of the application, please.
Yep.
All right, Mr. Hoffert. So the next requested variance is 600-1505. and we're not proposing any sidewalk along Chester Street. Is that right?
That's correct.
In your professional opinion, do you believe that there's any reason to suggest or to propose sidewalk from the Gonzalez property down to the opening or the driveway for the proposed self-storage?
No, many self-storages generate a minimum amount of vehicular traffic. No one walks to these type of facilities as a pedestrian circulation issue, because you're carrying something, you're taking something to a unit, you're picking something up at a unit. One does not carry it, they drive to the facility. Again, low volume driving, but therefore there's no technical need for sidewalk to be included in this project. If, however, during the land development stage it's required, it will be addressed at that time.
600-1503 A and B, we're requesting dimensional variances, and there's three particular requirements in there. One is to permit the existing driveway onto Chester Street to remain as it exists, location-wise. And you had already testified, I believe, that we're going to be shrinking that access down to 24 feet in width. Is that the case?
Yes, currently it's slightly over 30 foot in width. It exists that way today. It's a gravel driveway that comes directly from Chester Street. We're going to be narrowing it down to 24 feet, which in fact would then match the widths of the aisles within this particular proposed mini storage unit.
And if I'm correct, is the requirement that the width be 20 feet? No greater than 20 feet?
It's a strange section, because the unit or what the ordinance states is, if you have a commercial property that's within a residential zoning district, the driveway width cannot exceed 20 feet. If, however, this commercial unit was in a commercial zoning district, it has a minimum width of 20 feet. So what we're doing is we're going to request that we reduce the driveway width from approximately 30 feet to 24, getting closer to the zoning requirement, but allow the 24-foot width to match the internal aisle.
All right, next issue in those two sections is the proximity from the center line of the access to the Warren Street bypass. My understanding is there's approximately 29 feet of separation between the center line of the access to the Warren Street bypass right-of-way. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that does not meet the ordinance requirements. Is that your understanding?
No, sir. But again, keeping in mind that I believe we could consider this to be an existing non-conforming driveway, and that we're not making the situation any worse by this proposal.
And also, to be clear, it's not really it's not really a viable intersection, because you'll never be able to utilize that connection, correct?
No, due to the PennDOT barricade that exists today at the terminus of what I would call Chester Street, there is no vehicular access allowed with Warren Street bypass at this location. And according to the PennDOT maps that I have seen as well, provided by Mr. O'Neill, PennDOT does not have any proposal to open Chester Street to connect directly to Warren Street bypass.
Last item in that particular section deals with clear sight triangle. Can we provide a clear sight triangle to the Warren Street bypass?
Oh, no, it's not necessary. Because of the close proximity, it wouldn't make sense. This doesn't warrant a clear sight triangle that would normally be at a street intersection, which is measured 75 feet in all directions. What we do have is a private clear sight triangle for this particular site, project that is 10 foot, which meets code, in my opinion, relative to driveways accessing public streets.
So in the event that technically a 75-foot clear sight triangle is required here, we can't comply with that. Is that right?
No, sir, we cannot.
But it is your opinion that it's a 10-foot clear sight based on the private nature of the access?
That's correct.
And I'm going to just jump in here quickly. In your professional opinion, do you believe there's any safety issue with the clear sight triangle of the access here?
No, especially given the fact that Chester Street is virtually a dead-end street. There is no through traffic on this. This is the end of the road. So therefore, it is not an issue at all.
So there won't be millions of cars going through there?
No, sir.
Okay. Next comment, 600-1603 is to allow the one parking space, which is to the top of the screen. You'll see a 110 by 20 parking space up there. My recollection is that the ordinance does not require a specific amount of parking spaces for a use such as this, but it is subject somewhat to the zoning administrator's, I believe, approval. And so in your opinion, is one parking space sufficient outside of where the units are located for anybody that might be visiting here for whatever reason?
Actually, there's no real need for any off-street parking spaces for a type of facility like this. However, if someone comes with two vehicles and it's a busy day for whatever reason, yes, this suffices. I agree that the zoning ordinance does not specify any requirement for off-street parking for mini storage units. And as testified by Mr. O'Neill personally earlier this evening, he did mention that there's an existing lease on the billboard. So if in fact the billboard people come to work on the sign, they also then could use that particular space, you know, to park their vehicle, to change signs or whatever is necessary for maintenance of their the monopole billboard.
And at the expense of stating the obvious, that space is located directly adjacent to where that billboard monopole is located, right?
That is correct.
One thing I'd like you to address, Mr. Hoffert, we've already talked about the lighting. That's basically a will comply with whatever the Planning Commission and or council would require. There is a comment raised in the zoning administrator's memo to the board about the fencing along Chester Street. Can you address that for the board, please?
Sure. There's within the zoning ordinance, it states that if there is a fence within the front yard, meaning the front setback area, the fence cannot exceed 4 foot in height. What happens is anywhere else on the property, it can go up to a height of 6 feet. So our original plan was to install a fence within the 5 foot front yard. Due to the original comment, we shifted the fence back away from the 5 foot front yard, approximately 6 feet back from the right-of-way line of Chester Street, and which allows then that the height requirement of 4 feet is not applicable, and that we are allowed to go back up to the 6 foot since we are not within the front setback line.
And so to be clear, Mr. Hoffert, instead of asking for another variance, we did think we had enough room to move that fence, but also to retain the necessary 6 foot in height for security reasons.
That's right. Obviously, a security fence with anything less than 6 foot would not be a security fence.
Mr. Hoffert, very briefly, in your professional opinion, you believe that this proposed use is a good fit for this area, for this lot?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that this proposed use is detrimental in any way to the surrounding properties?
No, sir.
You believe that if this property is allowed to be developed as Mr. O'Neill is proposing it, that would in fact increase property values in the area?
I'm not an expert relative to land values or real estate, but I would somewhat agree as a land surveyor.
And do you believe that there are any negative impacts that you can see? No negative traffic impacts, no congestion. You don't see any significant number of vehicles accessing this property?
No, I do not.
Gentlemen, I have no further questions for Mr. Hoffert. Offer him for any questions or cross.
Okay. Mr. Fox, any questions?
I do not.
Mr. Bars, any questions?
I do not.
Okay. Mr. Gattone, any questions?
No.
And I have no questions. Mr. Paris, questions?
I have one real quick one. Along the Warren Street side of the property, we had, and this might be the reason for the comment about the fence height, we had also considered the setback along Warren Street to be a front yard setback because that is technically a street. And that's the reason for that, that comment in there. But just to clarify, you're proposing to build a 6 foot high fence along the Warren Street side on the property line. Is that correct?
Oh, no, not on the property line. It would be within the property by about 1 or 2 foot, yes.
Okay, but it would be within the setback area if that were considered a front yard. Well,
Yes.
regardless, if even whether it's side or front yard.
Yes, that is correct.
All right, Mr. Price.
I have nothing.
Anything else, Mr. Paris? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Not as far as question. I had a follow-up comment.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Mr. Cuck? And then I'm going to go to final comments.
The only thing that we would add, Mr. Chairman, is that Mr. O'Neill indicated to me just now that there's already a 6-foot high fence in that location along the bypass. So to the extent that Mr. Paris has raised an issue that we need to address, I would suggest that's either a pre-existing non-conforming condition, or in the alternative, if we need to amend our application to include a variance from that section, I'd like to request the board consider that at this point.
Okay. All right. Mr. Price, any comments?
No, the only thing before we get off, I would say is ask Mr. Paris to organize a Zoom workshop session.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Paris, your final comments on this?
No, I think Mr. Cuck addressed that by mentioning the existence of a pre-existing fence in that location. I think that takes care of any concern that we had as far as the need for a variance there.
Okay, thank you. So if there's nothing else from anybody, we will conclude this appeal. We'll issue a decision at next month's meeting. The decision will be mailed to you. I don't know if we'll still be doing Zoom or not, but if we are, so be it. So we thank all of you for your participation this evening and your patience, and we will see you next month on the second Wednesday of the month.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time and consideration. Have a good evening.
Thank you. And then we will set up that meeting, Mr. Paris, and we thank all of you. Good night.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Yeah, have a good night.